he was his hobby was carpentry.
That's right.
He actually did.
Good morning. Welcome to the museum. I'd like to introduce our next speaker in our community event series, Dr. Richard Mullenax. Dr. Mullenax was a professor and department head of plant and soil science at Mississippi State. He inspired and mentored a generation of scholars, researchers, and practitioners. He's a longtime member of the Starkville community and has enjoyed retirement for over 24 years. While his profession was plant and soil science, he has a deep love of history. Will you please welcome Dr. Richard Mullenax.
Well, I have been told one thing by several people. Speak loud. I will refer to a note every now and then. I think I worked harder on this. I did a paper in college. But I was growing up in Oak Ridge. And I do like history, as he mentioned. And Oak Ridge just didn't happen one day. There was a reason that it happened. One of the reasons it happened, guess where it started? In Norway. And the Germans had invaded Norway in 1940. And they began making what is called heavy water, which could be used for nuclear fusion. Now the Germans were way ahead of us in making atomic bombs. And so the Norwegians migrated over to England and Scotland and started a resistance program there against the Germans. And the Germans built a large plant that made heavy water, which is water, as you know, is H2O, this became HDO, or deuterium oxide. And that's all the chemistry we're going to talk about. And so the heavy water was produced in a place where it could not be bombed. The Germans made a hole like this in the mountain, and when the planes came over, when the English planes came over the mountain, they couldn't bomb them because they were set back inside of a mountain. So then what they had to do is figure out, okay, now what are we going to do? So they worked on gliders. Well, every one of them, the gliders were caught. They're executed on the spot. So that ended that project. So then they said, okay, we're still going to try this. And so they had a group of resistance fighters in Norway, also some from England. There were 8 of them. And they were parachuted into Norway in the worst winter in memory. And so they had a lot of intelligence, and they managed to blow up this thing where they were making heavy water. And they escaped back to Sweden, which was, you may remember the older folks, when Sweden was neutral. And so from there, what was amazing about this, they did all this and not a shot was fired. And they blew up this whole, for the Germans, so that set them back about 6 months. The Germans, being Germans, jumped right in, rebuilt the whole thing, started working again, and produced more heavy water. And they had produced 600 barrels of heavy water, and they knew that the Norwegians were going to try to get them again, so they decided they were going to relocate this heavy water to Scotland, to another place, not Scotland. So they did. And they had a boat called the Hydro. And it was a ship, and they put 600 barrels of heavy water on the Hydro. That's all they had left. And they were going to ship it to another port. Well, the Norwegians knew what was going on. Their intelligence told them what's gonna happen. And so they got on the ship with high explosives, plastic explosives, and they had an old watchmaker there in town who was also in the resistance, and he figured out how to make a bomb to go off with a clock. And so when the ship got halfway out across the fjord in 1,400 feet of water, they blew it up. And there goes all the heavy water. So that really ended Germany's dominance over anybody else in the world on nuclear physics. So, in October of 1939, President Roosevelt received a letter from Albert Einstein. And Einstein was telling him about what was going on. And I think he said they could make an atomic bomb. And I think this is the first time that Roosevelt and some of his friends, senators, representatives, have ever heard the word atomic. It was not a word that you used in everyday language because we didn't even know what atomic was. But, so then, on June 17, 1942, Roosevelt approved the recommendation to start the Manhattan nuclear project. And he gave the responsibility of this project to Leslie Groves, General Leslie Groves. And it said that Leslie Groves was probably the closest thing to an American dictator there ever was. In fact, he was given full responsibility for everything, for Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and Andrew, Washington. And he hired Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer didn't like Groves, and Groves didn't like Oppenheimer. And so Oppenheimer didn't like fat people. Groves was fat. Groves didn't like people who smoked cigarettes and drank whiskey. And Oppenheimer did both. And so they got along. But he was a brilliant person and he knew it. Groves knew it. And so he was made head of the project, the EC project. And so then he spent most of his time in Los Alamos. Oak Ridge started in roughly 1942, and it was a place called Black Oak Ridge. Wasn't even on any map in the world. Nobody had ever heard of it. And so it ended up there, but the reason it ended up there was Roosevelt had to move tremendous amounts of money to this project. And he wanted to do it without calling the attention of everybody in the Senate and everybody and all the politicians, why are you moving all this money? So he asked a fellow named Senator Keller, who was a representative from Tennessee, a senator from Tennessee. He was also head of the Senate Budget Committee. And he said, can you move this money from me without calling attention to it? He said, I can do that. He said, but where in Tennessee do you want to build this plant? So, little politics involved there. So, September 7th, 1942, Oak Ridge began. And I mean, there was so why you put Oak Ridge where they put it? One, they had to have electricity, a tremendous amount of electricity. Another, they had to have water. Now, if you remember your geography a little bit, the TVA dams there, which supplied the electricity to K-25. Now, you'll hear me refer to K-25 and Y-12 several times. Everybody thought this was a big code. These were codes, secret codes, where they were. There was letters and numbers. So somebody made up this, we called them Y-12, Y-12, and K-25, K-25. So that's what the plants were called. But anyway, there were nothing there, nothing. And so all this would require a tremendous number of people to build an Oak Ridge. People came from all over the United States. Sarah Wilson's father was a pipe fitter. He came from Little Rock, Arkansas. She went to school there at Oak Ridge, but she went to school, but she had to be bused to another town to go to school because there were no schools there. There was nothing there. And so it was very isolated. And that's another reason it was put there, because nobody knew about it. And there were literally thousands and thousands of people came, carpenters, bricklayers, masons, pipe fitters, sheet metal workers, converged on Oak Ridge because they all, if you could hammer a nail, you got a job. And so people worked there for several years until a couple of years. They built this thing almost overnight. And one thing they had to have was dormitories for the men to go from the dormitories to the plants. And also women who went from the dormitories to the plants. And my mama happened to be a clerk in one of the dormitories. So, and another thing there were no roads. Everything was mud. And if you talk to anybody who was in Oak Ridge in early days, they all called themselves mudders. There was mud everywhere. Everywhere was mud. No streets were paved. Everything was moved by army buses. And I remember when I was just a little fella, my mama and I were going to town, to the grocery store, and you had to go to the grocery store every day. One day they would have Wesson oil, next day they would have toothpaste, next day they might have something else. So every day we went to the grocery store, and we rode those old army buses. You remember the old gray-green army buses? Well, that's what we rode. And I remember one time in particular, we were riding a bus and it got stuck. And so the guys got out, pushed the bus out, finally, of course, we got back on the bus and we were covered head to toe in mud. And my mom and I sat there, we watched them out the window there pushing that bus. But that's the way we got around for a year. And then they had the idea of building boardwalks. Now, New Jersey thinks they have a boardwalk. They didn't have any boardwalks compared to Oak Ridge, because they had hundreds of miles of boardwalks in Oak Ridge. And they were there for years just to keep you out of the mud. And so, again, I go back to they had to have these thousands of people come in just to build the city and build the plants. And nobody really knew what was going to happen there. You talk about a secret city. It was a secret city. And my dad told me that when I was a little fella, we moved there. Two things I remember is my friends who lived down the street from us, after we finally got a house, they were from Texas, and they were Vanderpools. They had a bunch of little boys about my age, but they went to kindergarten. Well, I didn't go to kindergarten. My mom and daddy, being from northeast Alabama, northwest Georgia, didn't know what a kindergarten was. So I had to wait there every day till 12 o'clock when they got home where we could go play. And the entire city of Oak Ridge was in the woods. They were made out of a forest. And so we would go play we stayed in the woods all the time. We swung on grapevines, we swam in creeks, and which brings up another thing. Later on, as we got older, Oak Ridge was surrounded by a fence, 90 square miles. And every few hundred yards, they had watchtowers. These watchtowers were armed with men with Tommy guns. And you didn't want to try to climb that fence because you would have got shot. So what we would do, we would go down there and talk to the guy. Hey, we were 10, 11 years old. we wanna go swimming. How about let's go under the fence and go down and go swimming in Poplar Creek? And they said, okay, you can do that, but you better have your butt back here by 3 o'clock, because that's when the shift changes, and the guy that comes on after me won't know who you are. And I was in shock. And we always made sure we were back at by 3 o'clock. When we go back to the dormitories, again, that's the only thing. And my dad said the only thing they had to do, there was no entertainment, is that they're playing cards. And another thing, there was very little crime. The main crime was, at that time, Knoxville, Tennessee, was the biggest town in the world that was dry. And so, you got all these guys there, you know what they're gonna do, they gonna get whiskey when we're done. So, one of the main things they had to do was figure out, now how are they gonna go to Knoxville and get whiskey and bring it back to Oak Ridge? Because when you went through a gate, you had to go through a gate, no matter how you couldn't fly over it, couldn't drive through it, you had to drive around it. And so how we gonna get it? So then, they figured out all these ingenious ways to get whiskey back in the dormitories. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. They got caught and they had to pour it out. So, my dad said all thing they had to do is play cards. And after Oak Ridge, he never played cards again. Another thing that, for the dormitories, my dad worked at Whitesville. And for the dormitories, you were on buses. These old army buses again showed up, and they would take them in to the shifts. And you might get on a bus, and the guy sat down beside you. Y'all would strike up a conversation, and he said, "You work out at Y12?" "Yep." "What do you do out there?" "Well, I turn a wicket on a ratchet," or whatever you did. You were fired right there on the spot. No question, no more questions asked. You could not talk to anybody about what you did. And as the buildings became, K-25 at one time was the largest building in the world under one roof. And that building consumed more electricity than the entire city of New York did in 24 hours. So there's, again, the TVA dams supplied the electricity for that plant. But they were all compartmentalized. You had a place here, and they were working on this, that, and the other. And this had another over here, and working on this, that. Nobody knew what anybody else was working on. And you couldn't talk to each other about, you better not be caught talking about what you were doing, because you'd be shown the exit. So people, it was very closed mouth, and it was a very secret city, and they understood that. It was a secret city, and no talking about it. You know, the old loose lips, sink ships, and all this stuff, remember that. Some of you do, some of you not old enough to remember that. But I'm not gonna read, most of you are. You can just imagine when they first started Oak Ridge, they had to have all these scientists. And at one time, Oak Ridge had more PhDs per acre than anywhere in the world. But there was one lady, I read a book about Girls of Atomic City. And she was at Stanford. And she got, you didn't get an invitation to come and work at Oak Ridge. You got an order to come and work at Oak Ridge. You were ordered to go to a place that wasn't even on the map. You ended up in Knoxville. When you got to Knoxville, buses would transfer you to Oak Ridge. And then you went to work at a plant, which you didn't even know existed, and Oak Ridge is not even on the map. And to do something you didn't know how to do or what you were doing. So that was the way that some of the early workers described their jobs. They really didn't know what they were doing. Of course, it all came together later on, as we remember. Oak Ridge was a city that went there was no city. It went from no city to 70,000 people in a very short period of time. But these 70,000 people I mentioned a while ago were carpenters and workers of all types. And they came to build Oak Ridge. You know, when they built Oak Ridge, then they had to leave. But there were 70,000 people there, and they were put up almost overnight. And there were no houses, families didn't live there. And finally they got around to where they could build houses for families to come. And we were living in Rome, Georgia, and my mom and dad were in Oak Ridge, and I was living with my grandmother in Rome, Georgia. So we all got to move to Oak Ridge. And they had several different types of houses. And you got if a house came available, you better take it. And you might be an administrator, house on the totem pole, or you might be a custodian living next door to each other. And neither one of you knew what deal was doing. And show me one slide if you would. These are called flat tops. And you can see why. That's what my family lived in, and myself. From a little boy when I went off to college. And my dad said you would pass the field one morning, and it would be just a field. And then in the afternoon you get home, and the foundations, as you can see, the underpinnings for these houses were in the fields. Next day, you come by, there'd be houses there. Well, these were prefabricated houses. They brought them in on trucks and trains. They put them on the foundation. They put a piece of metal down the middle. They nailed it together, and that's your house. And they put a big furnace in the middle of it, and a coal burning furnace. And in the winter time, that thing would get so hot, it would get red hot. And then, of course, you see all those windows? You had to open all the windows in the house to cool it off. But in a few minutes, you had to shut them off again because it got too cold. So it was a constant open the windows, shut the windows. So that's one reason we got our exercise. As I mentioned a while ago, the scientists had to be brought in. And they were brought in from all over the United States, from universities, mostly chemists and physicists and engineers. But my dad was an engineer, but he didn't have a piece of paper saying so. But he would, later on, he would teach the nuclear engineering students, PhD students from the University of Tennessee, which was only 25 miles away from Oak Ridge. He would teach them the ropes. And again, he didn't have a degree, but he knew what to do. And so he worked there until later on in the 50s. You were always subject to a lie detector test. And you took lie detector test after lie detector test, and they would ask you all the questions. They will make sure that you're still straight arrow and not a confidence. Now, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of spies there. The Rosenbergs, remember the Rosenbergs? Some of you do. They were executed. But there were a whole lot of more spies there than just the Rosenbergs. And they were giving our secrets to the Russians. And so if you were a spy, you had to be pretty careful. You didn't want to get caught. I mentioned a while ago about the mud. Well, again, no roads. At every cross section, intersection, you had a MP who stood up on a platform about this high. And hot, cold, rain, snow, whatever, you had an MP standing there with a whistle, and he was directing traffic. Tweet, tweet, you come on, tweet, tweet, you stop. And then he was there 24 hours a day. Not the same guy. But you got the MP standing. The Oak Ridge was under the Army. We had Army doctors, Army dentists, Army nurses, and so on and so forth. And I guess that was one good thing, because the Army really developed penicillin. Now, of course, we know Fleming developed and found penicillin, but they didn't know much about it except it killed bacteria. Well, I happened to come down about just a wee lad with pneumonia. So they stuck me in the hospital, and they didn't know much about penicillin, but I got about 5 penicillin shots a day. Doctors today are absolutely insane to even think that was penicillin was a little bitty felon. But anyway, it cured my pneumonia. And finally roads were built, as I mentioned a while ago, we finally had the roads built. And the speed limit was 25 miles an hour. And that's it. It's not 35, it's 25 miles an hour through the whole city. And they had the turnpike, which would be similar, I guess, to our, I'm trying to think, Highway 82. But anyway, it was a 25 mile an hour speed limit. And Oak Ridge went 1,400 days without a traffic fatality, which I thought was amazing, and they did too. People didn't obey the traffic, or they would get caught and they would get fined. And they had a pretty hefty fine with this, but it was 1,406 days without a traffic fatality. And then, of course, you had the family moved in. You've got to have grocery stores. You've got to have this, that, and the other. And so I was there again. We had to go to the grocery store almost every day. My mama would put me in the buggy, and she would give me a bottle of whatever, and I had to set the buggy and hold it, because if she went down there and came back, it would be gone. Somebody would get it. So I had to sit there and hold it, whatever it was. And as I said, you almost had to go every day to see what trucks brought in. But we were very fortunate, because my daddy had a little bitty fishing motor, and the butchers liked to fish. And so my dad would let those fellows use the fishing motor, and when you went to the grocery store, you had a meat counter, you stood in line. And so you just got what they threw up there. And you wanted to stay too bad, you might get a piece of some gizzards. But anyway, when my dad went through, they threw a package of meat over there, and he didn't know what it was until he got home. And sometimes it wasn't, there were gizzards and necks and all this, but at least it was meat. And I remember we used to get these old steaks, and some of you folks can remember that they were so hard to cook that you take a Coca-Cola bottle and you would beat them up and beat them up and beat them up and then cook them. And then you would eat them. You'd try to eat them, because the more you chewed them, the bigger they got. And that was grissom, that was really grissom. Y'all can remember that. But so that little fishing motor got us a lot of meat. And so another thing, my dad had a 1937 Plymouth, and there were very few people on our street that had cars, and so and gas was rationed. But everybody got gas rations, whether you had a car or not. And so people would come get my daddy's car, and he'd let them go, they'd go to town, or they'd go within the limits of Oak Ridge, and they'd give him their gas ration. So we always had plenty of gas, and everybody smoked. Everybody smoked. And so my daddy got everybody's cigarettes who did smoke, so he always had plenty of cigarettes to smoke. And I would say the average age there was 27 degrees. 27 years. Oh, that's a very young population. And I remember reading in the paper one year, in fact, I think it's here somewhere, 1 month, they were doing things besides making atomic bombs. They were making babies too. Because one month they had 137 babies born in Oak Ridge. So, but with the young generation there, a young group of people, they had to have some type of entertainment. So they opened up dance halls, they opened up bowling alleys, they opened golf courses, movies. And so we always had something to do. Now, I remember movies, the Center Theater, which is here, we would go to the Center Theater, and on Saturdays they'd have 2 Western movies, 10 cartoons, movie told news, and the previews. I mean, you could be entertained almost all day long, but and it cost, my mama would give me 26 cents. It cost 9 cents to get in the movie, it cost 10 cents for a bag of popcorn, and the candy for whatever reason was 6 cents. So 26 cents, I got in the movie. I said, well, you know, devious as I was then, I said, I can figure out how to save some money. So they had movie theaters here, and so when the movie was over, after all the movies I described just a minute ago, everybody come out the side door. Well, just right inside the side door was to be a restroom. And so after everybody got through running out the window, I just stepped right in and stepped in the middle restroom, and the movie started, I'd walk down and get me a seat. So I saved my 9 cents and a little penny, give me another bag of popcorn. So, I was devious smarter even then. But Oak Ridge, again, was the so-called secret city. There was very few opportunities for young people to get jobs. I mentioned they opened up bowling alleys, and I set pins in the bowling alley. We got 8 cents a line. And I remember one time they had a state tournament, they called me the one serve the pin boy, and I did serve the pin boy from 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And I had 2 alleys. And you talking about hard work. And the first tip I ever got, was a guy gave me a 50-cent tip for working all day. And so I thought that was great. We also had a paper route. And you can find out a lot of things about people with a paper route. You know, we found out some people just lied to you. Some people had a paper, it was a 5-day paper called the Oak Ridger. And the Oak Ridger was 25 cents a week. So I got 8 cents a customer. I usually had around 100 customers, so I get $8 a week. And then also I'd go to the golf course and a caddy. Now to go to the golf course to caddy, you had to get up about 4 o'clock in the morning and walk about 3 miles to the Oak Ridge Turnpike, and you thought the ride out there is dark. And so the people who pick us up were usually the police. And so they would take us down to the golf course. We got the place where the golf course was. You had to walk about 2 miles just to get to the golf course to put your name on the list, or you could be a caddy. So that's we could make maybe $4 or $5 a day. That was big money. And then we also had a paper route with, and people would move away over there for 3 weeks, and so I had to eat the 75 cents myself. And but that's why I say you learn a lot about people. But also another way to make a little money, you could walk up and down the road and pick up Coca-Cola bottles, and you could get them redeemed for 2 cents a bottle. And so if you had to get 5 of them, you get a dime, you know. So that's and then other places, some of the fellows that Dad may have a gas station. He would work at a gas station for 35 cents an hour, But he could buy what we call dress britches. And so the guys with the dress pants, they got all the girls. So that's no blue jeans, we didn't get in, had Roy Rogers blue jeans, so we didn't get the girls. But, that was a funny situation, but nonetheless, I'll leave it at that. I talked about the tennis courts a while ago, and all those young people there, they would have several tennis courts, but they would have all-night dances on the tennis courts. In other words, you could dance all you wanted to dance. And they would leave the lights on the tennis courts and you go down and dance. If you could find a partner who would have danced with you that time of night. Now, when I got into high school, right before I got into high school, that was in 1952, they built the biggest swimming pool in the United States. And it was a huge swimming pool. And I remember we just, you could get in for a dime, stay all day. And they had diving boards and so on and so forth. And, but the problem was that went in the deep and the other was shallow and never could figure out which one was which. And so a lot of times you'd be diving, they'd take it for one time to find out. One thing about it is, I talk about passes, you had to go through a gate every time you went in and out. And these guys, guards at these gates, had Tommy guns. And you had to show a badge. Everybody had a badge. People who worked in the plants had a badge. It could be different colors, it could be different numbers on it, and have your picture on it. You had to have that badge all the time. Everywhere you went, you had to have a badge. And you had to have that badge in the plants, and you had certain places in these plants you could go with this color badge. And you were not allowed anywhere else if you didn't have that color badge. So, and one thing about it is, if you have your mother-in-law, she could get a 72-hour pass. And she could come and stay with you for 72 hours. When the 72 hours up, you better be at that gate. If you were not at that gate, they'd come get you. So, that helped, I guess, as far as family relationships, John, you have to worry about your mother-in-law too much. But anyway, I think I told you a while ago about Poplar Creek. We'd fish in Poplar Creek, we'd swim in Poplar Creek, and it would flood, and we couldn't get out of the reservation, so to speak. And then a little bit later on, we'd get a little bit more devious, a little place called Oliver Springs. To get to Oliver Springs, to Oak Ridge, you had to go up a hill. And these watermelon trucks, they'd be loaded, big old trucks loaded down with watermelons. And so, you know what happened then? We jumped on the back of his truck, because they didn't have mirrors on both sides, so we jumped on the back of the truck. Some other kids would run behind, and we'd sit there and eat no watermelon. And so we had, I only had a ton of watermelon to eat in the summertime, I can tell you that. Our schools were probably, at that time, I think they were ranked probably best in the United States. To teach there, you had to have, I don't care what grade you taught, or what subject you taught, you had to have a master's degree. And I even had, one guy had a PhD. So we had some fine teachers at the fine schools. In 1952, they opened up the school, which would have been my freshman year, and it cost $5.2 million, which absolutely was unheard of at that time, that somebody could spend that much money on a school building. but it had everything you could imagine. It had woodworking, it had metalworking, it had automobile mechanics, and then it had all types of art. And I think we had English, but English was a foreign language to us in East Tennessee. But Spanish, French, German, Latin, and biology 1, biology 2, chemistry 1, chemistry 2, math through light calculus. I didn't take that. And, I remember in 3rd grade, I didn't like math at all. And so we had little notebooks, you know, workbooks, you could put in workbooks. So one day I decided, I don't want to do this, so I threw my workbook behind the radiator. And for about 3 months, everybody be working on the arithmetic, and I'd be sitting there watching. And so one day somebody found my workbook. Oh my God. So I had to sit there and I worked and worked and worked and worked. And so this, I never did get caught up until this day. I'm still not good at math. But so that was one thing. Another thing I remember in the 1st grade, we had to learn how to tell time using a clock. Not a digital clock, but one that had 2 hands on it. And they had a piece of old cardboard, and they had the numbers on it, and they had the hands on it. And the teacher would ask you, what time is it? And some of them knew it, some of them didn't. And I could not tell time when a digital clock saved this clock saved my life. So I got where I would crawl under the table where the teacher wouldn't see me, so she couldn't call on me to tell what time it was. So, but in the 3rd grade, when the war was over, they dropped the bomb, and here's a bunch of papers y'all can look at later on. We moved back to, they closed down. All these tenements that Sarah Wilson lived in, they had a place to put a bed, but they didn't have a place to take a bath, and it didn't have bathrooms. And so there was all these thousands of tenants out there, tenement houses. And so she said that's the best fun she ever had, going down, taking showers and being bused to another city to go to school. Later on, after everything was open in 46, excuse me, they decided they're going to open Oak Ridge to the city. Everybody knew there was something going on in Oak Ridge, but nobody knew what it was. And so they finally opened the city, and everybody expected thousands of people to be there. Well, very few people had a car, so they couldn't go to it. And then the bus company was on strike, and they couldn't carry people to the gates. And so they had a very small number of people there, but I was there, and so with my mom and dad. And so I remember that, I may remember Rod Cameron, he was a cowboy. And Marie the Body Wilson, she was there, Adolph Jew was there, and some others. Rod Cameron had some rather unfortunate experiences there. The guy at a poker game lost $8,000, and he had a Rolex watch stolen, and he drank too much. And the next day, the parade fell off his horse. So that was the opening of Oak Ridge. And I do remember one thing in particular, and I've never forgotten this, and some of y'all may remember, well, Saturday morning they had Smiling Epic Dollar. He advertised Buster Brown shoes. You know, half the gang of Buster Brown, now these the air, and hi there, my name is Buster Brown, I live in the shoe, this is my dog Ty, he lives there too. And so they were singing this, and it went off the air. This came out of Philadelphia. And so Smiling Epic Dollar said, well, I just sat at home with little batches for another week. And so my mama got so mad she would never let me listen to Spinal Head again. But anyway, I did have a paper route, as I mentioned earlier, and you can see, put back on the flat top there. You can see they're off the ground. And so what I would like to do every day with my flat top, I had a paper route for 6 years, and I had one flat top about halfway to the route, and that route was about 3 miles. I was walking. Somebody said, "Why didn't you get a bicycle?" Well, yeah, I tried that, but Oak Ridge was not flat. You could go up a hill, you had to push it up a hill, you could ride down the hill, and you had to push it up the hill, so it's easier to walk than it was to ride a bicycle. So I was stopping in one of these houses and I would read the paper. And I always had one of my daddy's Camel cigarettes. And I was smoking my daddy's cigarette. And I'd read the paper. So I think in the 6th grade I was pretty well informed because I read the paper and smoking a cigarette. Now everybody didn't do that, but and as I said, the gate did open in March of 1949, and very few people showed up. It was a big disappointment. But there's a lot of things that I cannot emphasize what a secret city it was, because nobody ever mentioned what they did. And I remember when I was a little boy, looked out the window one day and people were jumping up and down and hollering and screaming and carrying on. And I asked my mom, "What's going on?" She said, "I don't know." And she went out there and she started hollering and screaming and jumping up and down too. The war was over. And so that's the story of Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge is still there, but not to the extent that it was in those days. And after the war was over, all the tenements were disappeared, all the old trailer parks disappeared, and then homes started. But you could not build a home there until back probably in the 70s. And well, excuse me, in the 60s you could build a house there. You could buy a piece of property. But prior to that, it wouldn't have said you couldn't do it. You had to live in government housing. And the government would come by, and you were subject to having your house paid at any time, day or night. They would knock on the door and we come to paint your house. And so they come to paint your house, and that's what they did. And and they would again come by with coal. We had coal boxes, and the government would come by. They would fill up our coal box with coal, and we would burn coal. As I said, mentioned that a while ago. And then by the end of the summer, the coal boxes are empty. And then that was a good place for all the dogs and mama cats to come help to litter the puppies and kittens. So that's in the coal boxes. So, but anyway, I did go back and work there later on at what they call UTACARL, was the University of Tennessee Atomic Energy Commission Agricultural Research Laboratory. And we were doing work with Oak Ridge. That laboratory started for one reason. After the bomb went off in Los Alamos, there were a bunch of donkeys in there that got murdered. And so after the donkeys died, they skinned them, brought the skins to Oak Ridge, and they put them in frames, and you could see the big lesions on their backs where they were burned. And so what they wanted to do is find out through how many generations what would happen to the critters. And I think that if the world ever ends by nuclear fission, the thing that will survive probably pigs. But I remember seeing a pig one day. I didn't go where the animal research was going on very much. But a pig, you could see his ribs. But then July and flies all over him. And I said, poor old pig, he didn't have much longer to stay. I was there in October. And I was looking at the pig, he said, "Yeah, that's the same one you saw back in July." He was already healed up, had his hair back on him, and you would never know he'd been radiated. So that was, like I said, the pigs were pretty resistant to radiation. So that more or less concludes my comments, and I'd be happy.
I'm gonna talk through some of the slides that we've got.
Yeah, this is, what we call, it was called Jack, you had to have places to go shopping and this, that, and the other. And this is, Jackson Square. And it had post office, movies, grocery store was over here. And then there was a couple of department stores came in. And this is later on, this was not, all the dormitories were back up on the right hand corner up there. And they were all demolished later on too. Go ahead if you would, for the next one. Well, I'm not gonna go, I will say this. This is a picture of K-25. K-25 at one time was the largest building in the world under one roof. And that's where they were working with separating U-235 from U-238 uranium. And today, there's not one brick left. That entire building, that entire project was torn down and moved to somewhere. There's not one brick is left there. The people were always wondering what's going on in Oak Ridge, what's going on in Oak Ridge, and nobody would talk about it. And then after the first bomb was dropped, they knew what was going on that day. August the 6th, 1944. And a lot of the, I say a lot, a good number of the scientists, in particular one at Los Alamos, they had some real concern about, was this the right thing to do, to drop these bombs to kill this many people? And a lot of them had some regrets about working there at that time to do that. But after the two bombs were dropped, the Japanese, they were just about to have a civil war. Half of them were surrendered, half of them didn't surrender. But they had another bomb, and they decided that they would go ahead and surrender. And that ended the war. So that more or less concludes my comments. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that I can. They're still not secret. Now, before you get to you, my dad, after he left Oak Ridge, the FBI, he moved to a place in Florida. And the FBI would still come by every 2 years and check on him, to see that he was still not giving away any secrets. Daddy, what are you doing down there? Well, he wouldn't tell me. Maybe he said, man, I couldn't stand it. Well, why don't you take me down there? I'll tell you what you're doing. And I was 6 years old, so he never did take me down there, and I never did tell him what he was doing. He went to his grave. He never told me, my sister, my brother, or my mother what he did. So we don't know to this day what he did. And he was not the only one that wrote. Most everybody else did the same. And that was the secret city, which could never exist again. All you need is 2 of these right here, and that'll be the Indian secret city. So again, Mike, you go ahead.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, you said that they started on it September the 7th, 1942. That was the day I was born. But the other thing was, you were talking about having pneumonia and getting all the penicillin. I had a disease when I was, I don't know, 3 maybe. They got me in the hospital, and I remember them coming all during the night. You know, it seemed like I would just get to sleep, and they would come in. Of course, they were not in your arm; they were in your behind, And I probably had penicillin shots as often as you did.
Well, I think I would, it got the point in it had a large syringe and it had a large needle. And my arm was about that big around. And I was scared to death. I'd almost get in the corner of the bed and shudder, knowing I was gonna get another one of those shots. Now, they finally just gave me so many shots in both arms, and then they went to my butt. And so I don't know how many shots I got there. But anyhow, they found out penicillin didn't work. They probably didn't need as much as they gave me, just like yourself. But, that, again, under the Army at that time, and they could do whatever they wanted to do. And so, it's fair.
Do you look on your experience of growing up there in a positive light or?
Oh, yes.
Positive?
I mean, we're in the woods. And little boys like to be in the woods. We had grapevines we swung over, and we'd have, one time, we were down at Poplar Creek, where I said a while ago, had a grapevine, we'd run down there, we'd swing over the creek. Once as far as you could go, you get a cannonball and fall in the creek. Well, anyhow, our grapevine broke, so we had to go find another grapevine, which we did. And so, we put somebody out there to make sure there's no rocks underneath there. Anyhow, this guy missed it, and I swung out there and I let go, and first I hit this rock about that far in the water, it was a huge rock, hit my rear end, and jarred me pretty hard. Again, I was about 12 years old at that time. And so when my foot fell off the side of it, it cut my big toe. And now I'm trying to get out of there. He got a big snake down there. So there's about 15 seconds I wouldn't want to relive again at all. Everything else I would consider positive. Yes, ma'am.
If you had gotten fired or relieved of your duties there, how did they follow up to see that you weren't telling what was going on?
Well, my dad said probably half the people there were FBI agents. Just a tremendous amount of, agents to ensure security.
Did they track anybody though after they were fired, or you probably don't know that?
But what?
Did they track people after they were fired to see if
I
they
don't know that they were, most of the people who were fired, they didn't even know what they were fired for.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they wouldn't have known very much,
Yeah,
I don't think.
Okay.
They didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
I grew up in Canada, as many know, and at the time Oak Ridge was started, we were reveling over Badger's discovery of penicillin. Not in the early part of the war, just in time to be used with lots of military wounds and so on. I wanted to ask, in general, 70 years later now,
80
What?
years later.
80 years later, what is, well, I meant after the war, 70 years after the war, what's the, what is Oak Ridge now, in general?
All right, you still have Y12.
Still have what?
Y12, a plant. And nobody knows, you can't drive by it, you can't look at it, you can't talk to anybody who.
So still secret research.
But the rest of the town is about 35,000 people. And they have good schools and good highways, and houses were built, they were originally called TDUs, which were temporary dwelling units, and they were built for the last 10 years, and now some of them have been there, 70, 80 years. But they've been refurbished, and new houses have been built, but some of the old ones, and well, now Oak Ridge never had slums, now they've got some slums there, and just like every other town.
Are there many of the original old prefabricated buildings, houses still around?
Yeah, so that was the funny thing about it. We lived in when we went back to Oak Ridge, when my dad was called back the second time on working on the hydrogen bomb, we moved to, in a flat top, and we lived at 135 Wellington Circle, which means nothing to you, but what happened was, they said, we gonna take out every third house. Well, 135 Wellington Circle was one of the third houses, but 133 Wellington Circle, the people that moved out, and they said we could move in. We moved next door. Everything was picked up and just took it next door, the same house, same everything. And so, again, I have no idea yet why they took out every third house. Every third flat top.
How much snow would, what's the biggest sort of snowfall you get in the winter? What's the biggest snowfall that you'd see there typical winter?
Well, I can remember, I can tell you this, that the biggest snowfall I ever saw was in seventh grade, and it happened on Thanksgiving night. And, it was over 12 inches. But I was, a senior in high school. I was taking senior English from 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and about 2:15 it started to snow. And Miss Turner was my teacher. And I said, I hope it snows, keeps on snowing. And she said, why is that? I said, well, we get out of school tomorrow. She said, well, I'm going rabbit hunting. So she said, well, I've been here 13 years and we've never missed a day of school because of snow. Guess what? The next day, they missed a day of school. And I went rabbit hunting. And so first thing she saw me when we got back to school, did you shoot any rabbits? Well, no, because the snow was so deep, all the rabbits were in the snow. We never even saw a rabbit track. No, we didn't shoot any rabbits, but we waded through a lot of snow. But sometimes you would go, just around here, you'd go a whole winter not having snow at all. Or just a few flurries and such. But, the other thing we did, most of us walked to school. We walked and walked and walked. We walked to the movies, we walked to church. Oh, I forgot to tell you about churches. They had one church, it was called Chapel on the Hill. And with this many people, you had many denominations. Well, the Jewish folks would have them from 7 to 8. And 8 to 9 be the Presbyterians. 9 to 10 would be the Baptists. So everybody had an hour. Every religion had an hour to go through Chapel on the Hill. And Chapel on the Hill is still there to this day.
How many were in your high school class, or the high school? And did you know Marty Sparrow? That wouldn't have
No, I
been
did not know Marty. She was 2 years behind me. And there's her thesis right there. And Bill Parrish, who some of y'all know, was her major professor. And I did not know Marty. She was, like I said, she was 2 years behind me.
And how big of a high school was it?
Well, it was a big high. It was 327 in our graduating class. It was a big high school.
That's big, wow.
Was Oppenheimer the main guy in charge of the operation?
He was in charge of the, well, Grove, Leslie Grove was in charge of the entire project. And he hired, as I told you a while ago, he hired Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was the editor.
Did the movie portray it the way it actually was?
It was pretty close.
The relationship between the two people?
Well, that didn't show up in the movie, the relationship between the two.
Yeah.
But if you remember, one of the bombs was called the Fat Man.
Yeah.
And Oppenheimer named that after Grove.
So Richard, you said your dad was called back to work on the hydrogen bomb. When did you learn that that was what he was doing?
I can't tell you that.
But it was
It's
not while he was
sure. I
doing
just
it.
don't know, I just don't remember. I knew that they were no longer working on the atomic bombs, and Russia was already working on the hydrogen bombs, and so we figured we better get back in the race. And he was called back when they started working on the hydrogen bomb there. Now, I will say this, sad part of this was, my dad was working both times in the hottest of the hot spots in Y-12. Section called 9206, which means nothing to y'all, or me either, or just a section. And the Clinton administration noticed, it was brought to their attention that there was a tremendous number of people dying that worked in that 9206. And so they accumulated a lot of money, and the families were compensated for that. And I don't mind telling you, you got $150,000 family. And so there were three of us, so we got $50,000 apiece.
So when the atomic bomb was dropped, did y'all know that it had been made there?
No. Not until the next day.
Oh,
If you look at these papers, I mean, it was dropped, the first one was dropped on August the 6th, 1945, and the papers, on August the 6th, 1945, it showed that. And then but you'd be surprised how many people said, my God, look what it did. They up and left. People who were living in Oak Ridge said, I'm getting out of here, and they did. And people who lived in surrounding places, they were just amazed at what's going on in this place that they lived next door to. They had no idea what was going on.
Did nobody speculate?
Pardon?
Did nobody speculate? I mean, working there in a secret situation must have been. Anybody speculate what was happening? I can't imagine living with tens of thousands or 10,000 people and not somebody,
Well,
even kids.
of course, some people knew what was going on. I mean, they had.
Oh, yeah. No, I meant those that didn't know.
But
Private
workers
secrecy.
did not know. They were given a job to do, and that's what they did.
They
See,
were
I just
told they
can't
were
imagine.
You could not tell anybody else what you were doing.
Yeah. I understand that, but that's why I'm saying speculate.
no.
During society at that time, people had a job and they did the job they were supposed to do, and they just, it's not like all this stuff we have now.
Well, nobody had ever heard of an atomic bomb, so
Yes.
their minds would not have probably
No,
thought of that.
of course not. I'm asking, did they speculate what was,
Well,
what
they
was
knew,
that?
I think they must have known, I remember my father talking about, when they got to work, they had to put on white coveralls, cover everything up. When they left, they took all that off, and as Richard said, it was all washed and redone, you know. So they knew that it was very secretive, they had no idea what they were working on, and they must have known that there was some danger to it, or else they wouldn't have.
Well, I can imagine that they thought it was medical, for example. I just can't imagine that people wouldn't stop to ponder, what's going on here? And think
I
maybe it's
imagine they
medical.
did.
I'm not
So
really-
they all had pretty good jobs, and they went ahead and did what they were supposed to do. And this was what they wanted to do. They wanted to really.
But they also were
Now,
told
they
not
didn't
to
get-
talk about it at all,
No.
not speculate or
They
anything.
didn't, now the reason all these people died, and my dad was one of them, they didn't know anything about radiation safety. They wanted to build a bomb, win the war, and that was their main objective. And I can tell you that people in Iran and North Korea, the same thing's gonna happen to them. There were no safety precautions whatsoever because they didn't know about it. Now, if you wanna read something right now, Google up Hanford, Washington. They've got 57,000 tons of radioactive sludge up there that they don't know what to do with right now. And some of this stuff has a half-life of 2,000 years. So,
Were the Japanese working on this idea?
no.
This may be terribly naive a question, but what was the delineation with Los Alamos, what aspects they were working on, and then Oak Ridge?
All right. Oak Ridge was making uranium and plutonium. Los Alamos was more or less assembling the bomb. They didn't have any large plants there, but that's what Kansas Washington was working on. I think it would be a plutonium.
So how are they getting it from Oak Ridge to?
Well, you got it by train or plane or whatever. They got it there. Of course, it was all secret, but. Oh, yes, sir.
Being a government installation, did you know that there was a depression, so to speak? I mean, you had to share cigarettes and gasoline coupons and stuff. Did you have like rural Mississippians sold during the Depression and during the World War?
I told everybody told me to talk loud. So,
Did you know that there was being a government installation, did you know that there was a depression going on?
Everywhere.
And everywhere else? I knew you had to fight for meat at the meat counter, but what was it like there?
The depression was
well, we started in 42. And that was the tail end of the Depression.
Right?
In fact, World War II brought us out of the Depression.
Absolutely.
And so.
It was rationing.
Yeah.
Everything was rationed. Sugar was rationed. In fact, until Mel and I got married, and we got married in 1970, I didn't eat sweets. Now I eat sweets. But we didn't have candy, cookies, cakes, pies, anything like that. We fried sugar.
But at the time, 42, when everybody was going there to build, they were still glad to have a job.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one reason too, that they would
That's
not
right.
have wanted to mess that up. They would
That's
not
right.
have talked or endanger themselves
They got
to
a
lose their
paycheck.
job because they had a job and they were glad to have it.
That's right. As I said, World War II brought us out of the Depression.
People were very patriotic though at that time, and they were more than willing to go in
Right.
wherever they were needed. Especially like, and you said your dad, my dad was 4F because he had poor eyesight. But what he could do was work in defense plants because he had a skill that was needed.
But another thing is, I think 1/7 of the workers there in those plants were women.
Yeah.
And the reason being is the men were all fighting in the war somewhere.
This has been great.
Yeah.
I would advise you, there's some newspapers here. This is Oak Ridge Secret Bar, USU, that's Atomic Bomb. That was in the Knoxville News Central headlines on August the 6th, 1945. And some of these others are, just essentially the same thing. Hiroshima was wrecked by the bomb, and the bomb consumed 100,000. They were not particularly worried about programs at that time. They were saying that it consumed 100,000 Japs. So, if you care to, there's a Oak Ridge, that's called Jackson Square, that was part of Oak Ridge. But Oak Ridge had, not only one centralized location, there were other little places around town that you had a drugstore, maybe had a barber shop, drugstore. And I remember some of y'all old enough to remember what drugstores were. You could go in and buy ice cream, you could buy Coca-Colas, and instead of the bar, a school, I guess it's a bar, I don't know what you could call it, chocolate bar maybe. But,
Soda bar.
no, that was not the only place that you could buy stuff. But that was just about the only place you could go to for a long time. And I remember one time we went to see a movie, and it was called 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. And there was a line that went forever to get in to see the movie.
Yeah.
And then the movie would end, and then the next group would go in. But that was entertainment. And people were, starving for entertainment. And that's why they built all these facilities to entertain the workers.
No TV.